He left her in the pouring rain. A bride, pregnant, trembling, begging for mercy. But what he didn't know was that she owned everything he ever wanted. Guests gasped, the storm roared, and little did he know she was about to change everything. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a woman who was humiliated on what should have been the happiest day of her life. But sometimes, the people who break us have no idea who we really are. Sometimes the ones who laugh the loudest end up with nothing to smile about. This is her story, and I promise you, by the end of it, you'll never forget her name. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for years, dressed in white, carrying hope in her womb, walking down the aisle to the man she loved. The venue was modest, nothing extravagant, just a small chapel on the outskirts of town with about 50 guests. She didn't come from money, at least not that anyone knew about. She worked as a librarian, lived in a small apartment, drove an old sedan that barely started on cold mornings. She was simple, humble, kind, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and always had a warm smile. Michael Carter, her groom, was different. He came from a wealthy family, owned a successful real estate company, and had a taste for the finer things in life. Their relationship had always felt unbalanced, but Sarah loved him deeply. She believed love could bridge any gap. As she stood in the small dressing room adjusting her second-hand wedding gown, she whispered to herself, "I just hope he really loves me." Her hands trembled as she touched her small baby bump, 5 months along. She had told Michael about the pregnancy 3 weeks ago. His reaction had been cold, distant, but she convinced herself it was just nerves. Today would change everything. Today, they would become a family. But love, she would soon learn, isn't always returned. The ceremony began at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah walked down the aisle alone. Her parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, and she had no siblings. The guests were mostly Michael's friends and family, people she barely knew. As she approached the altar, she searched Michael's eyes for warmth, for reassurance. What she found instead was coldness. The officiant began the vows. Michael's responses were robotic, emotionless. Sarah's voice cracked as she said, "I do." She meant every word. When it came time for the kiss, Michael barely brushed her lips. The guests clapped politely, but the energy in the room felt wrong. After the ceremony, as they walked toward the exit, Michael's best man, a man named Derek, leaned over and whispered something in Michael's ear. Michael's face changed. He looked at Sarah with something she had never seen before, disgust. Outside, the rain had started, a sudden summer storm that came out of nowhere. The guests hurried to their cars. Sarah held her dress up, trying to keep it from dragging in the puddles. "Michael, wait," she called out. He didn't stop. He walked straight to a black luxury sedan, where Derek and 2 other groomsmen were waiting. Sarah ran after him, her heels splashing through the rain. "Michael, please, what's wrong?" "Talk to me." He turned to face her, and that's when everything shattered. "You really thought I'd go through with this?" Michael said, his voice dripping with contempt. Sarah's heart stopped. "What are you talking about? We just got married." Michael laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "That was for show, Sarah, for my family. They've been pressuring me to settle down and you were convenient, but now I'm done." Sarah felt the world tilt. The rain poured harder, soaking through her dress, her veil clinging to her face. "Michael, I'm pregnant. This is our child." He stepped closer, his eyes cold. "I don't want it. I don't want you. You were a mistake, and I'm not spending the rest of my life paying for it." She fell to her knee, the puddles soaking through her gown, her hands reaching out. Please, please don't do this. We can fix it. Whatever's wrong, we can work through it." The groomsmen inside the car laughed. Derek leaned out the window. "Look at her, man. Pathetic." Michael climbed into the car. Sarah crawled forward, grabbing the door handle. "Michael, please. Think about our baby. Think about everything we've been through." He yanked the door shut, nearly catching her fingers. The car pulled away, tires splashing muddy water all over her. She knelt there in the rain, alone, her white dress ruined, her heart shattered into a million pieces. Guests who had witnessed the scene turned away, uncomfortable, unsure of what to do. No one helped her. No one came to her side. She was utterly, devastatingly alone. Sarah sat there in the rain for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Her mind raced. How could the man I trusted treat me like this? And our baby? What does he think of us? She thought about the pregnancy test she had taken 2 months ago, the joy she felt seeing those 2 lines. She had imagined telling her child stories about how Mommy and Daddy fell in love, how they built a life together. Now those dreams were drowning in the puddles around her. Slowly, painfully, she stood up. Her legs shook, her dress clung to her body, heavy with rain and shame. She walked back toward the chapel, but the doors were locked. The guests were gone, even the officiant had left. She was completely alone. She walked to her car, an old Toyota that was parked in the corner of the lot. She sat inside, shivering, staring at the empty passenger seat where Michael should have been. For a long time, she just cried, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that made her whole body shake. But then, as the rain began to slow, something inside her shifted. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who raised her after her parents died. Her grandmother had always told her, "Sarah, you are stronger than you know, and you come from strength." At the time, Sarah hadn't understood what she meant. Her grandmother had lived modestly, worked as a seamstress her whole life. But now, sitting in that car, drenched and broken, Sarah remembered something else. A lawyer's letter that had arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. The letter had been from a law firm in New York, informing Sarah that her grandmother had passed away and left her an inheritance. Sarah had been too overwhelmed with wedding plans to open it fully. She had glanced at it, seen something about assets and estate, and tucked it away, planning to deal with it after the honeymoon. Now, sitting in her car, she reached into her purse and pulled out the crumpled envelope. Her hands shook as she tore it open and read the full contents. What she saw made her gasp. Her grandmother, the humble seamstress, had been sitting on a fortune. Not just any fortune. $23 million. Sarah read the letter again, unable to believe it. Her grandmother had invested wisely over the years, had owned property in Manhattan that had skyrocketed in value, had stocks and bonds Sarah knew nothing about. And now, all of it belonged to Sarah. The letter also mentioned a trust fund that had been set up for any future children Sarah might have. Another $12 million protected and untouchable. Sarah sat back, stunned. Michael had no idea. No one did. She had been living paycheck to paycheck, working at the library, while sitting on a fortune she didn't even know existed. And the man who just abandoned her, who mocked her, who laughed at her pain, had just walked away from more money than he would ever see in his lifetime. For the first time since the rain started, Sarah smiled. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. She wiped her tears, started the car, and drove home. Over the next few days, she met with the lawyers, signed the paperwork, and officially took control of her inheritance. She quit her job at the library. She moved out of her tiny apartment and into a beautiful townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. She enrolled in prenatal classes, bought everything she would need for the baby, and started building a new life. But she didn't tell anyone about the money. Not her co-workers, not her few remaining friends, and certainly not Michael. She wanted to see how things would play out. She wanted to watch him live his life, thinking he had escaped, thinking he had dodged a bullet. Meanwhile, Sarah hired a private investigator. She wanted to know everything: what Michael was doing, who he was with, how his business was going. What she learned didn't surprise her. Michael's real estate company was struggling. He had taken out massive loans to maintain his lifestyle, and his creditors were closing in. Within 6 months, he would be bankrupt. Derek, his best man, had already distanced himself. The other groomsmen had moved on. Michael was alone, drowning in debt, with no one to bail him out. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's get back to Sarah's story, because what happens next will leave you speechless. 9 months after the wedding, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace after her grandmother. Grace was perfect. She had Sarah's eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Sarah poured all her love into that little girl. She hired the best nanny, enrolled Grace in the finest daycare, and made sure her daughter would never want for anything. Meanwhile, Michael's life continued to crumble. His business went under, his house was foreclosed. He moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. His so-called friends had all disappeared. One day, about a year after the wedding, Michael ran into someone who had been at the ceremony. The person mentioned seeing Sarah recently, driving a brand new car, living in a beautiful home. Michael laughed it off. That's impossible. Sarah's broke. She's probably living with someone. But the seed of curiosity had been planted. He started asking around, and eventually, he learned the truth. Someone showed him an article from a local business magazine. It featured Sarah, who had just made a significant donation to the town's library, funding a new children's wing. The article mentioned her inheritance, her grandmother's estate, and her plans to start a foundation for single mothers. Michael's blood ran cold. He did the math. 23 million. She had been worth $23 million, and he had left her in the rain. Michael showed up at Sarah's townhouse unannounced. She was in the garden with Grace, reading her a story. When she saw him at the gate, her heart didn't race. She didn't feel anger or fear. She felt nothing. "Can I talk to you?" Michael asked, his voice small. Sarah handed Grace to the nanny and walked to the gate. She didn't open it. "What do you want, Michael?" I heard about grandmother. About the money." Sarah crossed her arms. "And?" Michael looked down, shame finally creeping into his face. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Scared, Sarah. I didn't know how to be a father, and I panicked, but I want to make it right. I want to be part of Grace's life. I want to be part of your life." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm and steady. "You had your chance, Michael. You had me. You had our child. And you threw us away like we were nothing. You humiliated me. You broke me. And you laughed while you did it." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this." Shook her head. "There's nothing to fix, Michael. You made your choice. Now live with it." She turned and walked back to her daughter, leaving Michael standing at the gate, broken and alone. Months passed. Sarah continued to build her life. She started the foundation, helping single mothers get back on their feet. She traveled with Grace, showing her the world. She found peace, not in revenge, but in knowing she had survived. She had been broken, humiliated, abandoned, and she had risen from it all. Michael, on the other hand, never recovered. He drifted from job to job, never able to rebuild what he had lost. The memory of what he had done, of what he had thrown away, haunted him every single day. Sarah never spoke to him again. She didn't need to. Her life, her success, her happiness, that was the only response he deserved. One day, Grace asked her mother, "Mommy, why don't I have a daddy?" Sarah smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. "You have me, sweetheart, and that's more than enough." And it was, because Sarah had learned something that day in the rain. She had learned that her worth was never defined by the people who failed to see it. She was strong, she was capable, and she was enough, all on her own. What would you do if someone abandoned you, not knowing your true worth? Would you seek revenge, or would you rise above it and build something better? Comment below and let us know. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who later regretted it? How did it feel? Share your story with us. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that you are stronger than you know, then subscribe to hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this. Because there are more stories out there, stories of people who were broken and rose again, stories that will inspire you, challenge you, and remind you that no matter how dark the storm, the sun always comes back. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. You are enough, always.